And so, Elizabeth, you should be set and ready to go.
Thank you so much, Vicki. Well, welcome. It's a pleasure to be presenting to so many of you. I have been at Rice for 17 years now. I started out as a lecturer, a faculty lecturer, and then I moved to the Writing Center where I worked with faculty, graduate students, and undergraduates across all schools of Rice. I moved to the writing program and eventually transitioned into research development, which is where I am now. And I work supporting faculty on very large center-based grants, as well as early career awards, which is one of my passions. And I really enjoy working with early career faculty. We have a smaller K99 portfolio. We do not have that many postdocs at Rice, but I've enjoyed supporting them and being able to speak to them on occasion. And I hope you find this presentation helpful. Recently, I attended a really wonderful workshop training and facilitator training through MD Anderson Cancer Center. It's called SCORE. You may be familiar with that. That's Science Communication Advances Research Excellence. And that is a program to coach faculty in mentoring postdocs on research communication, which is writing, visual communication, oral presentations, et cetera. And I know that Dr. Carrie Cameron and her team are looking to expand that programming to postdocs themselves. And I'm going to be reaching out to her shortly and finding out what is currently being offered beyond their historic offerings to postdocs. And that's another program that I greatly recommend if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that. But for today, we are going to be talking about the K99. I am not going to be able to tell you everything about it, but we're going to give you an overview with some highlights and hopefully some strategies and pointers to take you forward. So I'll begin with an overview of the mechanism. I will talk about some key components of the K99 R00, which is the candidate background goals and the career development plan, the research plan, mentoring section, and institution environment plan. And then I'm going to close out with some tips and strategies for effective grantsmanship that will hopefully get you inspired to start the process of working on that K99. I want to give you my contact information up front, including my personal email, and I welcome emails to either of these addresses. I will say that we will have some time for questions perhaps at the end, but there are some questions I'm just not going to be able to answer within the context of a Zoom presentation. I won't be able to confirm your eligibility or to tell you whether or not you're ready to apply for the award. Those are questions that you and your mentor have to discuss together. And within the context of a group Zoom, it's often not feasible to answer specific questions about your application or your budget that may not be relevant to others who are here. But I'm happy to entertain any questions via email. And email also gives me a little bit of time to consider your question and maybe consult some resources if I need to. So if your question is very technical, I would ask you to contact me via email, and I do welcome that. I want to start off with a quote from Mark Kuchner from his book, Marketing for Scientists. The verb get here is a little bit crass, but in grant writing, we are in fact writing a document that must fit with the funder's desires. And in this case, the K99 is meant to fund someone who can really benefit from this award. What this means is that your application should respond directly to the funding opportunity announcement through a thorough and detailed account of what you've done to prepare yourself and what you will specifically gain from this training period. You also need to convince your reader, the reviewer, that you are a good investment and in fact are going to be successful in forging a pathway to independence. And that is what we are going to be talking about today. One of the helpful analogies that for me in understanding this mechanism a little bit better is that of an ecosystem. And so one of my colleagues and friends, Dr. Peg Atkinson from Atkinson Training Group that has done some workshops in the ETMC says that the awardee of the K99 is as much a product of a K award as the research they do. The K award reflects an ecosystem of candidate, mentor, and environment. So along those lines, PEG encourages you to think about what kind of scientist you are right now, what skills, knowledge, expertise you already have, what kind of scientist you want to be, which is essentially what a good part of this grant is all about. Thinking about what skills you need to become that scientist, and who's the best mentor to help you to get to that next level, and what specific educational activities you need to form a successful, effective plan. So an ecosystem is an interconnected community of organisms in their environment. Interconnected is the key word. Also note that as an early career, NIH is funding you. Your research plan is extremely important to the success of your application because it testifies to your ability to make that transition from postdoc to independent researcher. But the K99 ROO is meant to hone in on what you need to learn in order to carry out this project as well as your long-term plans. So you're describing this ecosystem to the funder, to the reviewers, and why this is the perfect ecosystem for your success. Whenever I begin working with any faculty member or student on a grant, I usually start by preparing my own checklist, which I do from which I take from the solicitation, the funding opportunity announcement. And one of the most important things that I always put at the top of those checklists is, first of all, the mission and goals of the funder. And we keep this in mind, top of the line. Everything that you do, that you write, all the different requirements you have to be really tailored to that funder. And so this is likely review for you, but mission for NIH is to seek fundamental knowledge about the nature and behavior of living systems and the application of that knowledge to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness and disability. And some of the goals are to foster fundamental creative discoveries, innovative research strategies, and their applications as a basis for ultimately protecting and improving health, developing and maintaining and renewing scientific human physical resources to prevent disease, expanding the knowledge base to ensure a return on investment for the public, and to promote the highest levels of scientific integrity, accountability, and social responsibility. So all of these are important to think about as we begin this grant. The next thing I would do is list the purpose or mission of the mechanism. So this is a Pathway to Independence Award, a great name for this award. That's exactly what it does. So in looking at my blue text, you'll see what's really out at stake here is in fact promoting independence. To become an independent investigator, to facilitate a timely transition of outstanding postdoc researchers into those independent positions. As you may know, if you're familiar with the history, in the biomedical sciences, sometimes that transition hasn't always been timely in the past. So this is one of the mechanisms. I think it first was launched in 2006 to help to aid in that transition. There is some debate right now in the scholarship about whether it does this effectively or not, or whether in fact it is not necessarily supporting that as well as it might. But I think it's important to keep this in mind. It's really a bridge support for you. It's to bridge that transitional period between your postdoc and your tenure track position or independent researcher position. And it's meant to foster that independent research program that's going to advance, in turn, the mission of NIH, which we just discussed. When you apply to the K99, you're also applying to a particular institute. And the institutes themselves have missions and goals. So it's just one example. I pulled the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases mission. I know that's super tiny there, but you can get the mission statement. And I encourage you to add those to your checklist too, so that you have all of these different missions in mind as you're proceeding with the writing process. We're going to talk briefly about eligibility. You can be a US citizen or non-citizen. You must have a research or clinical doctoral degree. Most applicants do have a PhD, but you're also eligible with other terminal degrees as well. You have to be in a mentored postdoctoral training position, and you must have no more than 4 years of postdoc experience at the time of the initial or the subsequent resubmission application. So the key to eligibility is whether you need this grant or not, and specifically whether you need at least 12 months of mentored research support. If you do not need that support to land a job, you're already close to landing a job, then you should not be applying for the K99. You should need 1 to 2 more years of support to achieve independence. On the other hand, if you need more than 2 years support, if you're just starting your postdoc, maybe it's too soon to apply. But this is a conversation that you really have to have one-on-one with your mentor to determine when the right moment for you is to apply. So the support for the K99 R00 is going to occur over 2 phases. We have a mentored phase, that's your K99. The award period, as I mentioned, is 1 to 2 years of mentored support. Salary and research costs are going to be different based on the institute or center, and you can look that up. There's some great links to that on the websites I will be giving you. And then you have an R00 independent phase. So that is up to 3 years of independent support. And you'll transition to that award as soon as you get that independent position. The award amount may not exceed $249K a year. And there are a lot of details on that budget in the solicitation and guidelines. So it's a very unique bridge opportunity. In addition to expectations of you, there are also expectations of your mentors, and in particular of your primary mentor. They have to be a strong researcher themselves, but also they have to have a strong record of mentoring individuals at the early career stage. Now, we know these things don't always go together. There's many people who are outstanding researchers who are not necessarily the best mentors, and vice versa. But for the purposes of the K99, you will need to have both. They also have to make a very serious investment in you, and they have to put that in writing. They're going to directly supervise you. They have to also confirm that they have sufficient support for your project, which might entail support beyond the funding that the award itself offers, if that's going to be necessary. And so you need to choose your mentor very wisely for this particular opportunity. There are also some commitments that you will have to make for each of the phases. One is that you must have a full-time appointment at the academic institution and be willing to spend 75% of your effort, which is going to be measured in person months in your current and pending documents, 75% of your time on this research in the mentored phase. And you may have other duties, but they cannot take more than 25% of your time or interfere with your ability to fulfill what you've said you're going to do within the context of your K99. In the independent phase, you will commit up to 75% of your time, 9 person months, to research. But the research doesn't need to be devoted exclusively to what you've suggested you're going to do in the R00 phase. NIH knows that your research agenda is going to expand once you reach your ultimate destination. And so they understand that. So it's not just what you've proposed, you'll have other projects as well. So when you're beginning this process of setting up your own folders and your own organizational system for writing the grant, there's 3 documents to consult. Moving from left to right, I would download these to your folder. In the left, we have the general instructions for NIH. In the middle, we have the instructions for career awards, which are going to tell you these two instruction manuals are going to tell you every form that has to be submitted and give you screenshots of what these look like and give you the basic requirements for the grant. If you're having trouble sleeping, I strongly recommend both of these guidelines books. They're very so horrific, but they're very informative. They spare you no details, so they will give you all of the information that you need. On the right, very tiny, I have a little screenshot of a parent announcement for the K99, and we're going to look at that more closely in a second. I would recommend that you start with the parent announcement. So now we're moving right to left and make a checklist of those requirements. That checklist is it supersedes anything that's in the guidelines. That's why you start there. But it's going to refer back to the career development instructions in the middle for general instructions on your grant. And so you're going to have to consult certain sections of those career development instructions and general instructions. So just for example, when you're writing your research strategy in the parent announcement, it will tell you all the general expectations you would have in any NIH grant. And then the K99 parent funding opportunity announcement is going to tell you the specific requirements on top of that for the K99. So you really have to take these mainly two different documents and weave them together to create your own checklist. And I strongly recommend doing that. I keep repeating that mainly because I think it's very difficult to wade through these documents and move back and forth between them. Like you want to actually take out cutting and pasting the things that are most important for you to know so that you have them in just a set of 7 or 8 pages rather than kind of mulling through and trying to remember where you were. But if you're not a checklist kind of a person, then I would definitely recommend that you at least make the guidelines for the funding opportunity announcement your own. Go in and highlight, make notes in the margins, edit that PDF, because it'll help you a lot as you proceed through the process. So there's 3 parent announcements for the K99. There's the NIH Pathway to Independence Award with independent clinical trial required, independent clinical trial not allowed, and independent basic experimental studies with humans required. So those are the PA 187, 188, 189. One of those will apply to you. So that is what I'm referring to when I refer to the parent announcement. Once you figure out which parent announcement is the right one for you, you will also want to figure out which institute you're applying to under that parent. And those institutes will all be listed at the top of the parent announcement. And there are links. I've given you a link to institute-specific instructions for the K99. And that's one more thing. It's going to tell you your salary support, your research support. It's going to tell you who your program officers are, so you can make a note of that for your checklist. So this is just an example from the National Cancer Institute. If you are trying to determine which institute you should apply to, I would recommend that you take a look at NIH Reporter and Matchmaker. And I've got a link to that in the lower right corner. So maybe you have a great sense already of which institute you're applying to, but maybe your work is a fit for multiple institutes. Again, your mentor is going to be your best point of contact there, but there's 2 things you can do to research. So you can look at existing abstracts for what's been funded in your area in particular institutes in the last couple of years. And you can see whether those projects seem similar to your project. So you would use Reporter for that. You can see in the lower left-hand corner a link to Matchmaker. This is the second way that you can determine fit. You can enter a string of text into the search field or a whole abstract, and it will suggest potential matches for you. So it's a very, very useful tool. I definitely recommend taking a close look at what's been funded lately. And I think that this is a great way to kind of get a little bit of a sense of what institute might be right for you. My next tip is to talk with a program officer at the institute that you think might be a good fit. Now, my colleague, Michael Spires from my professional organization, wrote an article about talking to program officers, which went into the Chronicle of Higher Ed. And he compares people's attitude toward calling the program officer, that they have as much enthusiasm as they would undergoing a root canal without anesthesia. Now, you may not have had a root canal at this point in your life, but I can tell you that what he's trying to explain is that they view it as very painful and not something that they want to do. But timidity is never rewarded in the grants process. And so I would strongly encourage you to take the plunge and contact your program officer. He does, my friend Michael does have some suggestions in his piece. You don't want to contact your program officer if you haven't read the parent announcement yet, the solicitation, and done some of your own homework. It's best to set up an appointment via email. I wouldn't call unless you're not receiving a reply. I would probably email twice before I would call. Most people prefer an email before a call, but I have called program officers on faculty behalf before, and sometimes it is necessary. It is a good idea in that email to attach a one-page project summary. It could be your specific aims page if you have that, so that they have something to consider before you have a call with them. You can ask them if it's a good fit for their program. If they do not say that it's not, you can request clarification. You might be able to follow up with like a 15-minute Zoom, depending on what they suggest. They may also refer you to other POs as necessary. They may have an idea that even though it's not a fit for their center or institute, that it's a fit for another center or institute. And I think it's important to remember that they are not the enemy. They really want to see you get funded. And in general, they want to be as helpful as possible. We want to be respectful of their time, but in my experience, most program officers are very honest and willing to help. They don't want to see you put a huge amount of effort into something that's not a poor fit from the get-go. So I would have that conversation first, do your homework, talk to your mentor, but I wouldn't shy away from talking to a program officer. One of the questions that people frequently ask when they're trying to figure out whether they're a good match for a particular institute or center is the funding rates, and whether or not their opportunity might be better at one institute or another. Obviously, I can't answer that question definitively for you, but I can provide you with the fiscal year 2023 statistics, which show how many K99s were reviewed, awarded, what the percent success rate was, and the dollar amounts. And you can see that these do, in fact, vary. But, I would say that the decision really has to be made with respect to the best fit, rather than trying to play the game of going to a particular institute or center that has maybe a higher funding rate. This is sort of a secondary, tertiary concern, and only if your work is truly a good match for more than one place. And these statistics are all available online, and I provided you with the link so you can check for yourself. And other opportunities obviously will be included as well. So the NIH's general reviewer criteria includes significance of the project, the investor's qualifications, the innovativeness of the project, the soundness of the approach, and the quality of the environment and the support that it's offering. But to reiterate, the K99 is looking at the biggest, I would say the overarching criterion is whether you're going to be able to get a tenure track job or equivalent faculty position at the end of it and make important contributions to the field that NIH values. So that is sort of the ultimate criterion. Should be NIH criteria, K99 criterion. Briefly about the review process. When you've submitted your application, it's going to go to the NIH Center for Scientific Review. They're going to check for basic requirements. The institutes and centers actually organize the first peer review, and they might combine their efforts depending on what they see in that pile. And they're going to do the individual scoring across the review panel. They're going to do group discussion and summary comments. There will then be, at that point, if your application moves forward, a secondary review with the council at the institute. And that's to look at human subjects, animal subjects, other considerations, and they'll make a recommendation for funding. But the institute itself is going to make the final call. There's a great video on NIH peer review on YouTube if you'd like to learn a little bit more about that process. The criterion scores that you're going to get for that first and most important peer review, I have a list here. The score is going to convey how each assigned reviewer on that panel weighed the strengths and weaknesses of each review criterion. And then they're going to compile an overall impact score. And so that's the individual reviewer's overall evaluation of you. It's not a numerical average, however, of the individual criterion scores that they gave you. They're summing it up in their own mind and coming up with an overall impact score. I mean, it will have some relationship, obviously, to those individual scores, but it isn't just purely quantifying those and averaging them. So an application doesn't need to be strong in every category to be judged likely to have a major impact. Once each individual person on the review panel has given a score, the scores across the review panel are averaged and then multiplied by 10. And this will give you your final score. So if your average was a 2, then your final score is a 20. Now, the funding line for any particular institute is not something that is published or that we can tell you, but on average, scores in the 10s and 20s are funded and possibly to some degree into the 30s. When the scores get higher than that, the chances of it being funded are going to decline greatly. So proposals that are scored in the 40s and higher are not likely to be funded. But again, that cutoff line is going to vary for every institution. So thinking about starting the planning process, and we're about to transition into the anatomy of the K99 and all of this different sections you're going to have to produce, you want to engage in backwards planning. I saw a message go out to the group about the June 16th deadline coming up. That seems to me quite soon, but it is possible if you've been working on this proposal so far that you might be able to submit for that deadline. And that I've also included the renewal, revision, and resubmission deadlines. I would work backwards from whatever deadline you're working towards. Remember that you have to route this through your institution. So different institutions have different internal requirements for when your research admin office, your sponsored projects office is going to have to do a compliance check. I think for many institutions in the medical center, it's 4 to 10 working days before the deadline. You're going to want to do revisions. You're going to want to send for feedback. I would say that ideally, in an ideal world, you'd be looking at sending for feedback 4 to 6 weeks out from the deadline so that you've given your reviewers ample time, your readers, correction, those who are going to give you feedback on the draft, ample time to respond to you and for you to implement that. And of course, there's so many other documents that we're going to require your collaborators on this project, your mentors, to produce a lot of material. And even though you might be willing to really put in the hours around the clock to meet a tight deadline, it's very difficult to secure documents from other people. It takes us longer than you usually plan for. For that reason, I would say I put 4 months. That's that's a utopia. I would say 3 months at least for the K99. There's so many documents you have to prepare for this. And even though this is an individual PI award, and we don't have 30 PIs that we're trying to wrangle for a project, there's so many different documents that you're required to produce, and the integration of those documents, the expectations for the integrations of those documents is so high that it's going to require a lot of back and forth, a lot of revisions to make them really speak to each other. And so you'll see that as we move forward with some of these requirements. So as I mentioned, there's many different components to this grant. And so I've just listed these here. A great long list, which you can compile looking at the FOA as well as the guideline instruction manuals that I have given to you. And just a lot of things that you're going to have to produce. So most of these are going to be outside the domain of this brief discussion, but I do want to take a closer look at 4 sections that are really important for the K99. And those are your candidate section, your research plan, your mentoring section, and your institution environment section, each of which has multiple requirements within it. I'm going to be calling on some different examples as we move through here. And these are coming from 2 awards samples that NIA, the Institute, has generously supplied. Really good K99 samples are hard to come by. So these examples are from Elizabeth Luth and from Rio Sanabria. And I looked them up to see where they are now. In fact, they did transition to independence. And Elizabeth, in fact, landed a position a year into her K99. So she didn't, in fact, even transition to the R00 phase. We do hope to have more samples to draw upon in the future. The science shows that models are really important when learning how to produce any kind of genre of academic writing. But you can help us out with that by winning this award and donating your sample to the GCC. And then we would be very happy to feature excerpts from your awards and from a broader range of institutes in future presentations. So let's take a look at the candidates section. In this section, you will have a background statement, career goals and objectives, and a plan for career development training activities during the award, which is your CDP, your career development plan. This section, it will be roughly 6 pages. It's going to be combined into one PDF with your research plan, and the total PDF will be 12 pages. So in the candidate background reviewer criteria, I decided in the interest of time and also your eyes, not to present you with the full checklist that is readily available in the solicitation, the parent announcement of exactly what questions you have to answer in these sections. Rather, I'm going to show you the reviewer criteria so you have an idea of what you're aiming at. So you can see here, I'm going to give you a minute to take a look at this. Okay. So really what they're driving home here is productivity as measured in your published papers, as well as the quality and impact of those papers, the quality of the journals in which they're published, and your research products in general, as well as whether or not they're thinking that you're going to be able to achieve a tenure track or equivalent faculty position within the 2 years that the award, the K99 mentored portion of the award has set forth. So I'm going to lay a heavy block of text on you now. This is the 3rd paragraph of Elizabeth Luth's section on candidate background. The first paragraph, I will tell you, starts with a personal connection to relatives that she had with Alzheimer's disease. She's studying dementia at end of life and the impact on caregivers. So this is the 3rd paragraph in this particular section. I'm going to give you a chance to take a look at it. So you're producing a seamless account of development and progress that's ever upward. Everything should read as if it was always part of the plan. It should be forceful, dynamic, and convincing. So a few tips. Create a narrative of your past that leads up to the present and points to the future. I know that sounds easier said than done. I know that not everything in our lives matches up neatly. There are missteps, there are misdirection. But for the purposes of a document like this, which is essentially kind of a personal statement bolstered by a lot of proof or evidence of success, past success, and predicting future success, you want it you're thinking about your past in terms of where you are now and where you're going. So you don't need to offer every detail. You're going to offer the most crucial details and experiences that are going to present you in the best light within this proposal. It is absolutely okay to mention personal interest or connection to what you study. I've heard that all PhDs are autobiographical in one way or another. And I firmly believe this. It was true for my own doctoral degree. You can think about how it might be true for you as well, or how it manifests for you as well. And in fact, Elizabeth did have an opening paragraph, as I mentioned, that was quite personal about family members that had dementia and how she became interested in that subject. So it reminded me a little bit, her first paragraph reminded me a little bit of med school application, but it worked for her. It isn't an absolute must. You don't have to have that kind of connection, but it's allowable and it has worked for some applicants. You also want to focus on how you've leveraged your past experiences and your current support. So I really like the way that she did this in this paragraph. She mentions these 2 grants that she's had. She didn't just win them, but she used them to advance her skills in 4 specific ways. That may feel a little artificial to you, but I think that it presents extremely well. Even highlighting these words first, second, third, fourth, advancing my skills in 4 specific ways, it helps that paragraph to be skimmable. And that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later as well. But I don't think we can count on a reviewer giving our application, our proposals, as much loving attention as we might want them to. They will be tired. They will be reading a lot of applications, and you want to make it as easy for them to be able to dip down into your application at different points to read more in more detail if they want to, but to find what they're looking for. You also want to make sure that this particular portion of the application also matches with your bio sketch, which is another requirement. So you have that personal statement that you're going to produce for your 5-page science CV bio sketch. And so there you're going to have a shorter version of the accounts you're offering here. So you shouldn't have a bio sketch you used on a different grant unless that account is very similar to the one you're presenting here. These 2 documents need to be homogenized to some extent so that they echo each other and make it convincing. And then you're also in this part going to identify what you still need to be able to move forward with the plans for your research and with your plans for your independent career. So here's everything that I've got so far and how much I've learned from it. But for me to be able to fulfill the R01 and become ROO and become independent researcher and go on to produce R01 grants, there are still some things that I have to learn. And so I need this mentorship phase in order to get there. So you're also presenting some career goals and also your career development plan. So here are the reviewer's criteria along those lines. And you will see as you read these, what they are really looking for is augmentation of your past experience. So they're really making a judgment call here. Do you actually need this particular award? Are there enough things that you need to learn to help you to really create a hugely impactful long-term research agenda, not to mention finishing, really being able to tackle that or your plans for the R00, but also whether or not you're going to be able to transition, whether you're going to be able to progress within this time period. Is the timeline, does it make sense? Are you actually going to be able to do these things that you've said you're going to do? The way you make a timeline convincing is through details, really specific detail. So let's take a look at more deeply at these two sections or components rather. So I've got a dovetail image here. I think this is really important to make sure that when you're setting forth goals, that you've considered what career goals in training you need for the key that you haven't already gotten through your through your past experience, and how that's going to play out in both the K99 and the R00. So whatever you say you're going to do in the training period of the K99, the skills that you're gaining should be ones that you need for the next independent phase. And you need to kind of echo that throughout the application. The career development plan, the CDP, should also be echoed in your primary mentor's letter, as well as perhaps some of your co-mentors' letters. And as I mentioned, any career goals you have, those also go into the bio sketch. So you have this complete dovetailing of different components of the project. So you want to include both research training that you need, as well as career development activities. You want to include coursework, for example. If you need to gain expertise in a new field and you want to be specific, you should include the who, what, when, where, why, and how for any training that you say that you want to undertake. You may also want training in teaching, lab management, grant writing, job interviewing, negotiation, leadership training. All of those should be reflected in the application, and they should be specific, not just gesturing to them, but having a specific plan for acquiring those skills. Again, I keep repeating this, your mentor really needs to know you and know your plan, and they're going to echo that again. It's a principle of grant writing in general to reiterate and to use some strategic repetition, but I think it's especially important in the career, in the K99. The detail is really important. And I had mentioned this just a minute ago. Whatever you say you're doing in the K99 phase, you want to kind of repeat how that's going to help you in the next independent research phase. Okay, so another wall of text for you, and this is from Rio Sanabria, from his section. So he's a geneticist and cell biologist. And for the project that he was proposing, he needed to learn more about biochemistry and mass spectrometry. This was just one module from the section on his goals and the kind of training that he would need to undertake. So he had 5 or 6 of these different paragraphs. So this is an example of just one paragraph. And you can see how specific he is in referring to who he's going to work for, what he's going to read, where he's going to take lessons, what other collaborators he's going to have, when he's going to go to a workshop. And so it's really, really specific. And it gets even more specific in his timeline. He creates a timeline with all of the various training goals included within it and documents that as well. So all of these details have to be backed up. Okay. Let's take a look at another paragraph. Obviously, I really like the parts here in blue where he's talking about the state of the field as well as the work that he's done in the past. But what he also gesturing to what he's hoping to do in the future, which is to study interorganelle communication, not looking at the organelles independently, but together. So I think that that is really the plan that he is laying out and confirming that the training plan he's proposing is going to give him the tools and expertise to answer significant questions in this field. He also includes a statement on independence from his primary mentor. So this is just a really nice brief paragraph on the aspects of his work, the cytoskeletal biology, how that differs from the work that's being done in Dr. Dillon's lab and isn't his primary focus of interest. And so that suggests that he's going to be able to publish work on his own that doesn't belong to the mentor. And he also mentions the reagents and strains that he can take with him. And of course, this is going to be documented also in Dr. Dillon's letter as the primary mentor to confirm that what he said in this section is also true. So very nice job there. Taking a look at the research plan, you have the research strategy, required one-pager on the training and responsible conduct of research, which is pretty much boilerplate depending on what's offered at your institution. And then you have your specific aims, one page, your research narrative, and your abstract summary. We're going to look at research strategy. So here's the reviewer criteria for that. First, is the K99 phase research significant and scientifically sound? Is the prior research rigorous? And has the candidate included plans to address weaknesses in the rigor of prior research? So that is very important. Has the candidate presented strategies to ensure a robust and unbiased approach? Are the scientific and technical merits of the K99 research appropriate for developing the research skills described in both the career development plan as well as a highly successful independent research program? Is the proposed R00 phase research significant, scientifically sound, and a logical extension of the K99 research? Is there evidence of long-term viability of the proposed R00 phase research plan? And finally, does the R00 phase project address an innovative hypothesis or challenge existing paradigms? Are there novel concepts, approaches, methodologies, tools, or technology? So this is very much of this overlaps with what you would see in any research award by NIH, but there is some reference to thinking about this connection between this bridge between the K99 and the independent research phase. It's actually really quite difficult, I think, to imagine what you'll be doing in several years or how a project is going to pan out. That is necessary, however, for this particular award. So thinking about some of the strategies that you might take, and this is a review, you want to make sure that you address this idea of the novelty of your project, the novelty of your hypotheses and methods. You do want to include preliminary data for both phases, for the aims in both phases, if you possibly can, certainly for the K99, but also for the R00. Very important, and you'll see this a lot in Sanabría's example. If you download that and take a closer look, he has a lot of troubleshooting, alternative approaches, risk mitigation plans, which he underlines in his document. Gets to be a little bit excessive, but that kind of risk mitigation, anticipating risk, anticipating problems that might arise, is a sign of a mature researcher. So it's important to include those within your plan. Remember that you can't be, you're not going to be reliant on your mentor or your mentor's resources at the point at which you're pursuing independence. So remember that it has to be specific and not dependent on anything from your mentor. And you also want to reduce the jargon, explain terms that for reviewers who will be outside your niche, especially since you can't expect for this particular mechanism that people who are reviewing it will be in that exactly in your niche. They're going to have some good background, but you want to make sure that this is really accessible to them and not a burden for them to read. I would also include enough white space. I would include really good visuals, none of those thumbnailed graphics that are so tiny that you would need to blow up the page to 200% to be able to get anything out of them. It should be really clear what comes out of them. I would also recommend, if you can, and Sanabria does this in his proposal, to include an encompassing visual for all the research aims. You could even include a conceptual diagram for your training too. I haven't seen that per se. I've seen more tables along those lines and timelines and Gantt charts and things like that. But, you know, it's entirely possible. But I think something kind of like a table of contents type of visual that gives the whole project at a glance, I think covering those two different phases of this bridge project, I think could be very effective. Now, thinking about your aims, they could be separated completely over the K99 and R00 phases. So that Elizabeth Luth's application is an example of that. So she has aim 1, which is in her K99 year 1, to identify common challenges, strategies, and gaps in care and support for community dwelling patients with dementia near the end of life, EOL. And then a sub-aim for that, identify differences in challenges, strategies, and gaps for African-American and white family caregivers. Aim 2, also in the K99 phase in year 2, adapting culturally inclusive dementia-focused training materials, creating a goal assessment tool for home hospice clinicians to guide care and support for patients with dementia and family caregivers, and incorporating perspectives of racially diverse stakeholders. Aim 3 is then in the independent phase, year 1 and 2, examining feasibility and acceptability of the training and tool and revising them based on feedback. And aim 4, conducting a pilot to determine the preliminary efficacy of the training and tool. So that's very neat and satisfying, that kind of separation that she has between the K99 and R00. You may not be able realistically to have that kind of separation for the kind of research that you're doing. And for that reason, research plan aims can cross both of the phases. Sanabria presents it in their timeline. They also have a narrative description of those research goals, but I thought it would be easiest just to show you the diagram that they produce. And so you can see the aims 1.1, 1.2, 1. And 2.1 and 2.2. In fact, there were only 2 aims for the project, but there were many, many sub-aims within those 2 overarching aims. And you can see that, in fact, the second aim, some of it does start in the K99 year 2, and then leads over into the years of the R00, the 1, 2, and 3rd year of that. So it can be very complicated. A lot of times that is how research goes. There are goals that are being, objectives that are being completed in parallel, some objectives that you may be completing early in the project that lead you to others that are connected, that are going to be in later years. And so his, or rather their proposal is a very good example of that. So we're looking now at the mentoring section. There's 2 different types of letters that are required. There are letters, plans, and statements from your mentor and your co-mentors. Those are all important. Probably your mentor, your primary mentor's letter is going to be the longest. You may also have other collaborators on your project, contributors, consultants that don't rise to the level of a mentor, or are not going to be supervising your project, but are providing you with something. We're going to focus on the former. Let's look at the mentoring reviewer criteria. So I'm laying it all on you at once here. So they're really looking at you, at your mentor's track record as well as yours, both as a mentor, also as a researcher. Generally, if you have someone who is going to be your primary mentor who is more junior, you would want somebody more senior than among your co-mentors. They also have to testify that they've read your plan, they know it well, that there's going to be a clear separation, that you're going to become independent. And you may also, in some cases, have an advisory committee. The advisory committee is not a requirement, but it could be that you're going to be meeting with 3 or 4 people together, and it has to do with the nature of your project and what your needs are. But in those cases, you're going to want to make sure that the advisory committee's experiences complement each other. And you can see that in these sample applications as well, that there were things that the applicants needed that the primary mentor couldn't provide. In some cases, those things were significant. And so an advisory board of mentors was established to help guide the project, and regular meetings with the group were scheduled to make sure that the project stayed on task. And ideally, though, everyone who's on your mentoring committee, all of your primary mentor and your co-mentors, they should all have an awareness of each other. They may not know each other having worked with each other personally, although in many cases they do, but they should be aware of who's contributing what to your project. They should have that kind of awareness of each other's letters, of what you're asking of them. So this is one of the things that influences how much coordination is really required for this particular opportunity. So let's look at an example. This is excerpts from the primary mentor's letter for Elizabeth Luth. It's 2 full pages in length. And in fact, it was rewritten and updated for the submission. So after the initial proposal was rejected and then she did a resubmit, the mentor updated the letter. So even if you're at that phase where you are resubmitting, all of your materials need to be reconsidered before you submit them. And it's a really outstanding letter. I loved reading it. It's great to see someone take so much time in the course of writing a letter of rec. So I'm going to let you take a look at it. An excerpt from it anyway. So there's planned meetings weekly. That's a lot, but that is a serious commitment. She talks a lot about her track record as a mentor. She's mentored over 90 junior investigators, including other K awardees. She herself is an outstanding, has an outstanding track record as a continuously funded R01 level NIH investigator. And she's won some awards. And at the end, she gestures to the independent contribution that Elizabeth Libby Luth, is making. She doesn't say it as directly as she might. If I was editing, I might say to make it a little bit more direct. But she does identify where her growing expertise complement the setter's existing portfolio, meaning that expertise isn't already within the portfolio. So I really liked that aspect of it. And then she adds this paragraph. So in this particular paragraph that the primary mentor writes, she mentions that she is aware of all of the other co-mentors who are going to provide expertise in areas that she herself doesn't have. So it is a team. So that is a really nice touch for this particular letter. And she does mention in some of the other paragraphs her connections. She does know some of the mentors and they've worked together. They are aware of each other at the very least, and they're in close contact with each other. They're geographically close. So it's a great letter. I do encourage you to take a look at it because it's likely that you will be asked to, when you're meeting with your mentor, depending on your mentor's experience with this K award, you're going to want to tell them what that letter needs to include and to offer suggestions for what you'd like for them to say. So I think it's important to become familiar with it. And this is a great place. This is a great letter, even if it's not in your, even remotely connected to your area of research, to take a look at and unpack in planning your own mentorship letters. We'll look very briefly at the institutional environment. There's two components here. We have the institutional environment as well as the institutional commitment letter, which is a letter that's going to be written by a department chair or a dean committing to supporting you through the K99 phase. But we will look at the description of the institutional environment. The review criteria. To what extent does the institution provide a high quality environment that's appropriate? To what extent are the research facilities and educational opportunities you have in this environment appropriate? Hopefully they are, since this is where you are, for your research and career development goals. And evidence that the sponsoring institution is in fact committed to fostering your development. And finally, a statement that an assurance, and this will be in the letter from the chair, that you can spend 75% of your time directly on the career development and research activities that are proposed in the K99. So some tips. You can make this more modular, kind of like a facilities document where you talk about all of the various different programs and centers and institutes that are available to you, or you could make it more narrative in nature. I will tell you that Luth does make it more modular, and Sanabria, their document is more of a narrative, but either way, it could be effective. You should mention yourself and how the environment supports you. So that's where it's different from facilities. It's not just a listing of how great the institution is. It's how exactly you're going to draw upon those resources to support your project. So here's a paragraph from Luth. And it's on the Irving Sherwood Wright Center on Aging. Okay, so we have some facts about the Irving Sherwood Wright Center on Aging. we have its patient population, we have the type of practitioners, we have the sheer number, a very large number of unique patients. And then we have a statement that a connection has already been made. So that's really what one of the differences between a facilities type document. It would cut off before we got to possibly before we got to the connection that she's made. But you want to make sure that you follow through and list exactly how you're going to draw upon it, who you're going to be working with, and how it's going to support you. And I think this is hers is a very good example. All right. So that was very fast and furious, just some touch points in various sections that are key to this particular mechanism. I now want to talk a little bit about grantsmanship and the K99 R00. And this section is going to be a review of some of the things we've talked about before, as well as some resources that I'm hoping that you can draw upon as you begin to produce your own award. So first, as always, an inspirational quote. So I love this quote. I do think it's a positive quote. It's by my friend and colleague Barbara Walker in her book, which actually is not a book for biomedical researchers. It's for another group of researchers in social sciences and humanities who work with some of the most difficult to get types of grants. But I love her description of grant writing as creative writing. I think it is, in fact, one of the things I like most about it is that, in fact, you're getting a plan for something that hasn't happened yet. And that is kind of what makes it akin to fiction. But it is a very well planned out example of fiction writing. And I think the same way about preparing syllabi for a classroom. Like, it's so perfect before you put it into actually into action. And there's a kind of beauty in being able to produce this perfect utopian thing. So I want you to enjoy it. Like, I know it's probably daunting, but I hope you enjoy producing this K99. And I will say though, it's not, the difference between a grant and creative writing or fiction is that grant writing is a type of research story. It's a very unique genre of academic writing. I just love it. And I do want to talk about some of the differences between proposal writing versus, say, another genre, your dissertation writing or journal article writing or conference proposal writing. There is risk involved in proposal writing, for sure, because it is futuristic. It hasn't happened yet. So you're trying to plan for every possible thing that could happen. It's like the best laid plan ever. But it's because it's risky and you don't necessarily have every detail about what's going to happen that it requires so much risk mitigation and planning. It also has a different structure and pacing from a journal article or other documents you might write. I know that a grant could be much longer, for example, than a journal article, but the pacing, in fact, tends to be quite dynamic and faster on average than a journal article, depending on where that's being published. It tends to favor brevity and a reader, I think, that is going to be skimming. And so finally, I think there's a lot we can do with the form of a particular proposal. And that has to do with what it actually feels like when you're looking at it on the page and whether it is inviting, whether or not it makes it easy on the reader. So just to kind of recap, it's future oriented and therefore risky. It has to be attentive to other priorities, not just your priorities, or rather your priorities have to match with the institute, with the funder, with the mechanism. In general, it is more persuasive. I do think we use persuasive rhetoric in other academic genres as well. You may have heard the term selling. I don't like that term simply because I think it cheapens it just a little bit. I think what we're doing is being persuasive and convincing the reviewer that our project is a good investment. And in this case, that we are also a good investment. You can be excited, and that's okay in this genre. You do want to keep it relatively tight. It's a little bit different than journal writing articles along those lines, and making it accessible. So to do that well, you have to give yourself time. I said 3 months or ideally more for the K99. I keep talking about making your own checklist. It's partly because I want you to own the solicitation. I want you to own the requirements and have the time to make them your own. I do want you to speak to your sponsored projects office about their requirements. I do want you to review successful applications, and you may have access to some that I don't have access to. At the very least, to take a look at abstracts of successful K99 on Reporter, as I mentioned before. And you might even reach out to successful candidates that you find on Reporter if you have some kind of connection to them. I would not recommend doing a Freedom of Information Act connection to anybody. We had a debate on my professional organization's listserv about this one time. There are a lot of institutions that are not as fortunate as either Rice University or the Texas Medical Center, where we do have amazing resources for our researchers and can connect you to models and examples and things like that. So a lot of people will ask for models or samples on our listserv. I would refrain from, even though all proposals are public information, I would refrain from doing that. But I wouldn't be afraid if you've got a connection to somebody either at your institution or another institution trying to get a hold, see if they're willing to share with you. They might say no, but you might as well ask. I do think it's a great idea to have a convo with your project officer, and be sure to give your mentors and the other people who are supporting you on this application the information they need. It takes a lot longer to write these letters than you can ever imagine. And so they've got a lot going on. So to make sure that they have the time they need. And if people are willing to look at your full draft and you have time to do that before the deadline, I would give them, give your reviewers at least 2 weeks. And ideally you'll have time. In an ideal world, you'd be able to revise your documents a couple of times at least. 2 is kind of a conservative estimate. The second suggestion that I have is to learn to use models appropriately. So I want to encourage you to read samples that are outside your discipline and certainly outside your niche. And the reason for that is you are much more free when you are reading those kinds of samples or models, because you're not going to be distracted by the content. And that was one of the things that I did quite frequently when I was working in a writing program, and enabled me to begin to think about writing as a process and to be thinking about writing as a genre, different types of genres, paying attention to the patterns, because I wasn't familiar with the content. And so I was looking for the moves that the authors were making. I was unpacking them paragraph by paragraph to see what kind of work that paragraph was doing in a document. Easier to do if it's not in your area. Otherwise, you'll start looking at what they're actually saying in the content and you'll get distracted. But first, even before you begin to read, just look at them. I mean, actually observe them. What's the layout? How much white space? How do they format? Are they using boldface, underlining, italics? Are they using all 3? Are they using them for specific things? Where have they placed the figures? How big are they? What kinds of headers do they offer? So just sort of the big picture look, flipping through it. I mean, and how does it feel to you when you're looking at it? Do your eyes blur? Are your eyelids drooping? Is it daunting? Do you not want to dip into it? You know, that is good information to have. We frequently overload proposals. I think it's really hard to avoid. So then I want you to drill down and look at sections and finally paragraphs. Look at the length, look at the use of space. Within a single paragraph, you might look at the power positions, which are the first and last sentences of a paragraph. Usually you have a topic sentence, you have a transitional sentence at the end of the paragraph. How are they using those positions really effectively so that if the reader was just looking at first sentences of paragraphs, that this would actually form a skeleton of the document as a whole? Like you could just read that and you would know what this grant is really all about. Then you can dip into content, but in a very specific way. I want you to look for key academic moves in that content. Where are they where are they putting the state of knowledge on the topic? Where are the unanswered questions or problems to be solved? That's your gap. How are they going to fill that gap? Why is it important? What's the significance and impact? Where do we see novelty and innovation being touted? Remember in those early, in the early pages of that research plan as research strategy, as well as in your aims, you're really kind of making a triangle where you're carving out a research space. And so you're starting with the territory, the general territory. You're talking then about where the gaps are. And then at the bottom, how you're going to fill it, objectives, aims. So kind of keep that in mind. You can easily find these things in other people's writing, even if it's not in your own discipline. And finally, you can take a look at individual word choices. This was something that I did in my graduate studies quite a bit. Sometimes I would be reading articles. Sometimes they were in my niche. Sometimes they weren't. Sometimes they were in other disciplines too that were tangentially related. I would note language chunks that I really liked. Like somebody had a turn of phrase, they just expressed something really well. They did a great job of hedging. They did a great job setting up a really challenging gap or talking about their work in relationship to someone else's work, which is often very challenging. Sometimes our work gets very close to another researcher's work, and it's really hard to kind of tease out those differences. And so there were just choices that I just really admired in writing that I looked at. And I just kept a list of those so I could kind of draw upon those strategies when I was writing myself. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. I would definitely use the review criteria as your guide. So you want to make sure you address all the reviewers' criteria. And in fact, the instructions in the K99 in the parent announcement are even more specific than that. You do want to use, as I mentioned, these highlighting the key information that the reviewers are looking for. Don't make them hunt for it. And then also you want to follow the organization and the nomenclature of the grant so that your reviewers can easily find what they're looking for. They want it, so you can even set it up for them. And it seems a little cheesy, but believe me, they'll appreciate it. So if their criteria has the candidate presented strategies to ensure a robust and unbiased approach to research questions. So when you're outlining those strategies in your research plan, you could conclude by saying these multiple strategies provide a robust and unbiased approach to answer my research questions. So you're essentially echoing the same language in the FOA, and that is encouraged. You do, one of the questions we're frequently asked is when to write the specific aims. The answer is at the beginning and in the middle and at the end. So it's now and later. It's really good to get something down on paper so that you can discuss it to write, so you can have a discussion with your mentor or your PO. You do want to seek feedback from your mentor. You do want to get, if you are lucky enough to have a peer or a co-mentor to read it, ask them for 3 or 4 comments that you could actually, actionable items that you can use to revise it. And you want to take then your revised aims to your PO to make sure that you're a good match. Now, there are a lot of different sources for your specific aims. A lot of the books I'm going to recommend at the end have different sections on this, but I want to recommend Bioscience Writers, and I put a link to it. I know this is super tiny in your view, but they have a great publicly available page that other K99 writers have told me that they've really loved, which talks about the aims paragraph by paragraph and line by line. And they're showing you exactly what they dissect it and unpack it and show you exactly how a paragraph is built from sentences, each of which is doing a certain kind of work in that paragraph. So you can see in that kind of colorful part on the right-hand side, that's the first paragraph. We have a hook, we have known info, gap in knowledge, critical need, all color-coded. And they do that for every paragraph in an actual specific aims page. So I think that that's a really, really great resource. And there are others, of course, and you may have your own favorites. You want to also make sure that when you're writing up your past experiences, you're not just making a laundry list, you're really making it your own. For each past scientific project that you've worked on, you do want to address the challenge, the gap, the findings, the impact and significance, as well as what you contributed to it and what you gained from it to the greatest extent possible. I want to point you towards a great book. I have a bigger picture of it at the end. It's Joshua Schimmel's Writing Science, where he compares science writing to storytelling. And he mentions the classic storytelling structure, which is a little different than the standard narrative arc. So in any great story, the hero, which is you, the researcher, ends up really kind of making a full circle back to the beginning, but with a difference, with new knowledge and experiences that allow you to tackle what you're going to do next through all of the challenges. And so you're kind of creating your own hero's narrative of a sort. Don't laugh, because I'm dead serious about that. When you're producing the accounts of your past experiences and what your potential might be. You definitely want to highlight the payoff of your research plan. Why is your project needed? What's innovative about it? How is it going to get done? How long is it going to take? What are the payoffs? And I encourage you to ask yourself sort of a big overarching question. What will happen if you aren't funded? Or rather, what won't happen if you aren't funded? Like, why is this project necessary? What is it going to bring to the world that otherwise wouldn't be there if you didn't do it? And also, what's going to be brought to the world by you becoming an independent researcher that would otherwise not be brought to the world if you didn't do so. So to kind of keep that in mind as you're writing. You do want to write clearly. I know that's easier said than done. Steven Pinker has a wonderful quote about the curse of knowledge, which has some backup in the scholarship as well, and how that curse can lead to confusing writing. Look at that. So studies in applied linguistics have shown that, in fact, writers, and in particular novice writers, often underestimate how much information the reader needs to make sense of the argument. You may have seen that already in mentoring graduate students. And certainly, if you take a professorship, you'll be working with a lot of novice writers. In their own mind, it's clear. They already know what they want to say. It is logical. But the curse of knowledge is not knowing what the reader needs, or assuming that the reader needs less than they actually do. And in fact, as a writer, you need to serve as the guide. I know that one of the fears, I think this is particularly true among grad students, is that they want to sound smart. They're ramping up their knowledge in the discipline. They want to prove that they know everything that people who are already members of their esteemed members of a discipline would know. But in fact, I think when you talk to most reviewers, and you may have had some experience reviewing things yourself, that you'll find that in fact people are not insulted by you taking the time to really explain what it is that you're doing. One of the best ways to do that is through what we call meta discourse. And we could talk all day about meta discourse, but I will tell you, meta discourse is discourse about the discourse. It's crucial in your writing because it increases key academic vocabulary and can be used to guide the reader. And so it's those moments where you step out of your narrative to guide the reader, showing that you are aware that someone else is reading your document and you're giving them some guidance. There's many, many types of meta discourse. I'm going to show you 3. One is called frame markers and transitional signal words, things like first, second, last, subsequently, then. Also transitions like similarly, furthermore, on the one hand, on the other hand, therefore. Those are like driving instructions. It's no different than turning left, turning right at the next intersection. You're giving your reader some signals. In contrast, I'm going to deviate from what I just said. Similarly, here's another point that goes along with what I just said, so that the reader doesn't get whiplash. When readers are looking at skimming a document, skimming a paragraph, they're looking for these terms. And these terms, I often just underline them in a paragraph because those are the logic markers of a paragraph. Very important. You're going to have hedges, even scientists hedge. These words are very important in softening your claims and opening, keeping you kind of safe because often your claims will be might be proven incorrect or open up a space for disagreement. So there we're aware of how a reader might feel about what we're saying, and we hedge. There are also boosters, which also help you to convey confidence and certainty and excitement. Always beyond a doubt, certainly, clearly, conclusively, definitely demonstrates, indisputably. You may not use these very often, depending on your discipline, but you can use them. You can also use engagement markers like surprisingly. Anything if you're in a more theoretical field, you might use words like imagine that to set off a certain scenario. That is considered to be meta discourse. And in fact, your footnotes are also meta discourse. They are gesturing to something outside your text that bolsters your text. So think of meta discourse as your friend. It anticipates, it's you speaking to somebody else, teaching someone else your argument. You want to also use signal words, and I mentioned that before, like especially when you're pointing out your work in relationship to others, as well as to giving a rationale for what it is that you're doing. In the center, I have an image of a very tiny little book that I really rely on a lot. We call it The Book. It's by Angela Hoffman, Scientific Writing and Communication, and it's in the natural sciences. And it gives you all kinds of templates for different phrases, turns of phrases, and signaling for various components of both proposals and research articles. These kinds of language chunks are really important, especially in proposal writing. I know that you could go to a 3-day workshop on all kinds of technical writing principles. We don't have time for that. I want to remind you of the importance of topic stress. And just through one example, this is sometimes called concatenation, and this is one of the reasons why a paragraph might get confusing. You can see in my confusing example on the top, we don't have a linkage between topic and stress. But in this clear example, we're making a link between the topic of one sentence and the stress of the next. We're ending with covalently bonded atoms in the first sentence. We're starting with bond strength in the next. We're ending with reactions in that second sentence. We're starting with reactions in the third sentence. So you have this dovetail between each sentence leads you naturally to the next. One of my favorite tips, and it's not possible to eliminate jargon. It drives me crazy when people say that. Your proposal's not for the mass public to read, it's for an academic expert to read. But you can choose to reduce jargon, and you can choose key terms selectively and define them clearly. So this is called code glossing in the world of applied linguistics. So this is defining terms or offering examples to explain concepts that you think the reader might not know. If you think that everyone knows it, you put the term at the beginning of the sentence. If you think that you're not sure, you put it in the middle, you kind of hedge your bets. And if the term is at the end, you're defining it for everyone. So here's an example to make that meaningful. This idea that excited states relax with rates determined by solute-solvent systems' ordinary energy fluctuations, commonly called linear response theory, is a critical component in the success of transition state theories of chemical reaction rates in liquids. Now, you can't do this for every term, but if you're concerned about defining key terms, I would do it. For the sake of a proposal, you do not want to confuse a reader. You should use code glossing to help define key terms. You also want to use strong research verbs, which are usually not vague research verbs. And so I've given you an example of some different kinds of knowledge verbs, comprehension verbs, application verbs, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation verbs here that you can put to use. So these are just very fast and furiously a few of the tips I have for making writing more clear. Most of it is happening at the level of the paragraph in the section, though, in crafting really great headers, really great topic sentences, helping that reader to skim and dip down into your text. Eighth tip, weave a consistent story. We've said that before. The story you're telling must match up across all documents. The team selected is the team you need. The K99 has to lead to the ROO. The K99 training has to enable you to conduct the research in the independent phase, and everything is going to be supported in your budget, and all details, timelines, budgets are well integrated. So just think about this as telling a really clear and compelling story that has a powerful message about you and your work that is in line with the funder's priorities. And last but not least, I've got some books that are worth reading and looking at. Some of them are specific to grants. Writing the NIH grant proposal is very good text. There's also successful grant proposals in science, tech, and medicine. I've got a few science writing books. Josh Schimmel's is a really inviting one. Your students might really like that one too. My colleague Luke Parkitney at Baylor had recommended Essentials of Writing Biomedical Research Papers as one of his personal favorites. From the applied linguistics world, we have 3 texts telling a research story on the lit review, abstracts, and the writing of abstracts and creating context on introductions by Feek and Swales. They are leaders in the world of teaching academic writing, and those are instructors' texts, but I think you would enjoy them, and eventually you'll be teaching these skills too if you're not already, and I highly recommend them. Scott Montgomery's text, the Mark Kuchner text that I cited at the beginning, Marketing for Sciences is for Fun. One of my colleagues at University of Oregon recommended it to me, and I think it has some value thinking about, he uses it with early career faculty in teaching them about persuasive rhetoric. And the last one I have is Patricia Goodson's Becoming an Academic Writer, 50 Exercises for Fast-Paced, Productive, and Powerful Writing. And I highlighted that here, just a section from the table of contents to give you an idea. All of these are basically 1 to 2 page exercises. They're 10 to 30 minutes, and they give you a writing task to do. I think this would be really great in a writing group or with a lab group. I think it's helpful to break a large piece of writing into specific tasks. And it's for journal articles, reports, and grant apps. And there are a number of different NIH, YouTube, and other materials that NIH has provided for you. I encourage you to look at those those materials as well. NIH has a lot of resources for you. Daunting website, but you can figure it out. There's a lot of really great resources out there to help you with this. So I want to now thank you for your time and attention, and I definitely want to wish you well as you prepare your K99 RO application. Please do, when you win that award, please do consider donating it to our group. I would love to highlight your application rather than just Luth and Sanabria in my presentation. Would love to have you on a future panel and have you as a mentor. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Festa, for providing incredible information. This was all very helpful, and I just appreciate the way that you broke down the process. So just for everybody that is on the webinar, we will have available a recording of this session because I know that Dr. Festa gave such incredible tips that it will be helpful to be able to go back. We'll also provide a PDF of the slides so that if you missed some information, you can go back and you can take a look at some things that you missed. And as she indicated, her email address is here, and she provided her personal email at the beginning of the presentation. So you can contact her or you can contact me because you've gotten lots of emails from me. So you definitely have my email address. And so you are welcome to reach out to either one of us if you need further assistance. So anyway, so thank you again, Dr. Festa. Thank you all for sticking with us for this past 90 minutes. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the future. And as Dr. Festa said, be sure and share your K99 tips with us if you come across any that you want to share with the group as well. So y'all have a great afternoon, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Oh, that's nice of them to say thank you.